Welcome to this very special program we have today to celebrate World Oceans Day. I'm Mary Miller. I'm the Program Director for Environmental Science Partnerships at the Exploratorium. Our first guest today is a good friend of ours. We've worked with her for a long time, Anna McGaraghan. She's from UC Santa Cruz, ocean scientist who works in Rafe Kudella's lab. Welcome, Anna.
Thanks, Mary. It's good to do this today.
Now, you've worked with us and you study a particular kind of organism called phytoplankton. Tell us, what is phyto and what is plankton?
Sure. Phytoplankton are microscopic, single-celled organisms that live all over the world's oceans and in freshwater too, but today we're mostly talking about in the ocean. And phyto means plant. So phytoplankton, although they're not plants, they're plant-like. Many of them are photosynthetic. They can make their energy from the sun. So plant-like, and plankton means drifter. So they drift around the ocean. They're pushed where the currents go. So essentially what they are they're the ocean's tiny drifters.
All right, and you sent us some pictures, and I thought you could just describe a little bit what we're looking at here.
So we're looking here at images taken through a microscope. The largest phytoplankton that we're looking at here are smaller than a poppy seed. So if you picture, if you have a bagel for breakfast with poppy seeds on it, that's about as large as phytoplankton can be. So we're seeing a whole bunch of different kinds. One of the interesting things about phytoplankton, one of the reasons I like them so much, is there's so much variability. They're really beautiful. They come in lots of different shapes and colors, and they're kind of fun to look at. So they're a great thing to study for that reason. And one of the reasons, well, one of many reasons why we care so much, phytoplankton are really the unsung heroes of the ocean. Because they're photosynthetic, they're the primary producers, they're the base of the ocean food web. They support all ocean life, but they also support life on land because they produce much of the oxygen we breathe. Phytoplankton really produce 50% or more of our oxygen. So they're really important, but most of us have never really seen them unless you look under a microscope like what we're doing here.
One thing I notice about these phytoplankton is there are a lot of different colors and different shapes, and some of them look like they even can wiggle and move a little because they have kind of antennae or little almost legs coming out of them.
Yes. Well, phytoplankton, again, there's a lot of different kinds. What we're looking at here, there's 2 or 3 examples of freshwater plankton here, and the rest are marine. And of the phytoplankton that I largely study, there's 2 main groups. There's diatoms, which are made of silica. So they're essentially little tiny greenhouses for collecting sunlight. So if you look in the all 3 on the bottom with the really geometric shapes and the spine sticking off, those are silica-based diatoms. And the ones that have little tails are called flagella, and that group is dinoflagellates. So examples of the dinoflagellates are in the upper right, the 2 that are stuck together. Also in the center, the kind of orangey ones, those 2. And the one in the center row on the right, all of those are dinoflagellates. And that means that they have 1 or more flagella, which is a little tail, and that helps them to spin through the water. So if you looked at a live sample in a dish, if you saw some phytoplankton that were moving around, that's probably the dinoflagellates. And these 2 different groups tend to live or thrive under different conditions. So dinoflagellates prefer warmer water. They can swim up and down for nutrients or for sunlight. And the diatoms prefer colder and more nutrient-rich water. So you see the community change based on ocean conditions.
So you talked a little bit about the good side of plankton. Phytoplankton. There's also a bad side. Can you talk a little bit about when plankton go bad?
Sure. So as you can see here, we've highlighted in red a couple of the examples of plankton in our slide here. Some kinds of plankton, when plankton bloom, that's what we call it, when one species kind of takes off and they reproduce rapidly, and there's a lot of one kind in the ocean. And there's a bunch of different reasons why that might be bad, depending on what species we're talking about. So all 4 of the highlighted red species here can produce a toxin. So that means that inside their bodies is a kind of, essentially a kind of poison, which doesn't harm the plankton themselves and often doesn't harm an organism that eats these plankton, but farther up the food chain, the toxins can build up. So it can be harmful for sea life like sea lions or dolphins or otters. And it can be harmful for humans if we're eating things that have been consuming these plankton. So it's one of the reasons we want to monitor what kinds of plankton are in the ocean. And what that means really is to look at the ocean and this changing phytoplankton community as often as we can to see what kinds of plankton are present. Different ones thrive and bloom under different conditions. So we want to kind of keep our eyes on these ones that can cause what's called a harmful algal bloom.
Mm-hmm. And so these are all just individual beautiful portraits, but this is not what you really see when you do your plankton work.
Right. What we're looking at here is sort of, exactly, you can think of these as like a glamour shot. Very specialized, 1 or 2 cells on a slide with a beautiful photograph. But if you really want to look at plankton in the ocean, this isn't what you get. So traditionally, the way to monitor phytoplankton or to study phytoplankton in any way is you get yourself a net, and you need access to the water, and you go scoop up a plankton net and you put it in a dish under a microscope, and this is more like what you're gonna see. So as you can see, an untrained eye, or really even a trained eye looking at this, it's a little bit messy. You've got lots of plankton. You can start to recognize some shapes. There's some spirally things, and there's some round things, and there's some like stuck together things, but there's also sand or bits of seaweed or bits and pieces of other kinds of marine organisms all together. So it really does take a trained eye and a lot of time to look at a sample like this and be able to say how much of which types of plankton we have here. So one of our, just an example as we're looking at this slide, one of the species in California that's very toxic, it's called Pseudonychia. It was on that previous slide. It was long, thin needles. You can kind of see in the middle of the bottom of this image, there's some long, thin strands. I can't actually even tell right now if that's Pseudonychia, but it might be. So that's kind of an example of how tricky it can be to look at a sample and know what you're seeing.
Mm-hmm. But now you have a fancy, fancy new tool, a robot that you even have at the Exploratorium looking at plankton, maybe even as we speak. Let's take a look at that.
Yes. So we have a very, very cool new toy to help us monitor plankton in California. So this, what we're looking at is my coworker, a robot named Miranda. So on the right is a picture of Miranda outside of her ocean and weatherproof protective housing. So the housing thing is on the far right, and the tower of electronics is Miranda. And on the left is a picture of Miranda's house at the end of Pier 17, right next to the Exploratorium. So what Miranda is, she's called an imaging flow cytobot, an IFCB, and she is an autonomous underwater, we don't operate her underwater, but she could be underwater microscope. So what she does here on the end of Pier 17 is she's attached to a pump which sucks ocean water up from below the pier and runs it through a chamber inside of the robot, which photographs every individual living cell and produces one photo of each plankton cell. And then she can send them back to me via the internet. They all arrive on my computer, all of these images that she takes.
So she works 24/7. She doesn't get a virus. She doesn't get sick. Well, she probably has some.
Right, she doesn't get quarantined.
Some things, sometimes she needs a little work in the shop, like any mechanical device, but she can do so much more than a human being looking under a microscope. So let's take a look at some of the data, some of the pictures that Miranda has taken.
Sure. So this is an example. We said earlier that those really beautiful phytoplankton photos we were seeing were the glamour shots. They were kind of hard to get, but Miranda produces that kind of image all the time. And these, I selected some really nice ones, but Miranda isolates individual cells and takes a photo of each one. And what she does is every sample is 5 milliliters, so a small volume of water, and she can do it every 20 minutes, round the clock. So she can produce something like 30,000 images a day of plankton. So it's far more than a person with a microscope and a net can sample. Generally, a good monitoring program means that somebody's looking at one spot in the ocean once a week. And Miranda, she's still only looking at one spot, but she can do it round the clock, different tides, night and day, all the different variable conditions. We can still see what plankton she's seeing. This is brand new technology. They've been around for a few years. Our lab actually has 3 of them, Miranda, Tina, and Vanessa. Tina's in Santa Cruz and Vanessa is in New Zealand, also looking at phytoplankton. So with all 3 together, the volume of photographs of phytoplankton that come into our lab is far beyond what human eyes can look at. We can't go through all these photos and look for the species that we think are important. So what we are doing with these instruments is we're training them to do the identification. So one of my tasks in the lab is I go through all the thousands of images that come from Miranda and I identify the plankton for her. And she remembers that information. So essentially what we're doing is we're training what's called a classifier so that we can run Miranda's data through this classifier and it will spit out the identifications for us.
So it's sort of
it works
like,
a little bit like facial recognition.
Yeah, like facial recognition, like you have on Facebook, says, "That's my son." Even when he was little, it can recognize different conditions.
So that's the idea. If we are able to tell Miranda frequently enough, if you look here on the slides that we're looking at, on the bottom, we have those needle-shaped plankton again, the center bottom image, that's Pseudonychia. That's one of the highly toxic species that's common in California. If you've ever heard in the news of Dungeness crab fishery is closed for toxins, it's usually this one. So we're looking for that. And if we can give Miranda enough labeled images of that species, then she, when one pops up, can kind of eliminate everything else and say, I think it's this one. And then down the road, ultimately, when she's running truly autonomously, she'd be able to send us an alert when one of the toxic species, when its numbers start to increase and a bloom is forming. And it sends it all to a computer. So if she was out on a ship, or if she was on a mooring out in the ocean, or similar instruments to Miranda, we can get this kind of like round the clock view of the plankton community.
I think one thing is that these new tools that we're using to study the ocean give us more power, or just, just more data. So when you reflect and think about World Oceans Day, and you think about plankton and ocean ecosystems, what is it about, plankton that you think is just so important, why you study them?
I think really understanding plankton and sort of seeing the plankton community and having eyes on the ocean just gives us such a better picture of ocean health. We tend to not think of the ocean as driving the whole health of the planet, but it really does. And that is based in phytoplankton. So being able to monitor plankton as best we can helps us understand changing ocean conditions and therefore changing global conditions.
Yeah, and they're just so cool and beautiful. And we're so happy to have Miranda at Pier 17 and to be able to work with scientists at U to help the public understand a little bit more about what's happening in the oceans. Thank you so much, Anna, for being part of World Oceans Day.
Thanks, Mary. It was great to talk with you.
Welcome back to the Exploratorium's virtual World Oceans Day celebration. Because we love plankton so much, we have a special presentation all about these ocean organisms. Here to present that is Josh Cassidy, cinematographer and lead producer for Deep Look, a wildlife video series about tiny things by KQED and PBS Digital Studios. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you very much for having me.
As I said, Josh brought a short film about plankton. Tell us a little bit about shooting this video with its teeny tiny little actors, Josh.
Yeah, I was surprised by how challenging it was, actually. So the way to film the plankton is, of course, under a microscope. And to do that, first you need to catch them. So we worked with a couple different folks, Christina Yu at the Exploratorium, and then also we worked with the William Coughlin Lab over at the Romberg Tiburon Center in Tiburon. So the way they do it is they'll put out a net, a small net, and sort of drag it through the water, and it collects up the plankton. Then they can take that out and separate the different plankton into different groups, and then put those under the microscope. The really challenging part is that they move some of them move incredibly fast. So fast that you don't even, it just looks like they're there and then they just disappear. There's no, swimming out of frame or something like that. The way that they described it to me was that these creatures can be the fastest animals in the world, including humans and jets, if you consider their scale. So what that basically means is that they'll just suddenly disappear. So it was very challenging to film, but over a few days, working with all the microscopes and with the researchers there, we were able to get the shots.
That's really cool. Thanks so much, Josh. Let's roll that video.
They look like unfamiliar worlds meandering around some cold and distant star. But these are living things, plankton, tiny sea creatures, so small they're almost invisible to the naked eye. Individually, they are mere specks in a vast ocean. But together, they are part of a grander story, one that affects us in ways you wouldn't necessarily expect. The name plankton comes from a Greek word meaning wanderer. And that's what they are, drifters. They can't fight the ocean currents. They just drift. Plankton get their energy in a couple of different ways. Phytoplankton draw energy from sunlight, like plants, and produce oxygen along the way. This one's called a diatom. These are tiny, but super abundant. They produce about half the oxygen we breathe. These are dinoflagellates. They get their energy from the sun too, but they can steer themselves through the water just a bit with those little appendages you see called flagella. The second group is called zooplankton. Most of these are way, way bigger than the phytoplankton. And unlike most phytoplankton, they need to actually eat. You can see how this one creates little currents to pull the food in towards its mouth. Some plankton drift forever. Others, like these, grow up into something else. But all of them are about to be called into action. It's called upwelling, and it happens when wind and currents converge. Nutrients surge up from the deep ocean and toward the surface, jump-starting an explosion of life, a bonanza. The plankton reproduce at an amazing rate. Krill and fish feast on plankton, birds and sea lions feast on fish, and so do we. This is where most of the world's seafood comes from. And then, just as quickly as it all began, the winds die back, the upwelling slows, and the frenzy subsides. What's left, the remains of this giant oceanic bacchanalia, drift back to the deep, waiting for their next moment in the sun.
Welcome back to our continuing celebration of World Ocean Day. I'm Mary Miller, Program Director for Environmental Science Partnerships at the Exploratorium. I'm really happy to introduce John Largier, professor at UC Davis and Bodega Marine Lab. His specialty is physical oceanography, and he studies the different ways that water moves in the ocean. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Mary. Good to be here.
So, John, why is it important to study the physics, the motion of the ocean? What's important about it?
Well, the motion of the ocean is how water moves around, really, from one place to the other in the ocean. And so we want to understand where it's coming from and where it's going to. And the physics is, why does it move like that? What drives it? So it's, in many ways, it's like in your body, the blood will carry oxygen from your lungs to your brain and make everything work well. If the blood stopped flowing, your body wouldn't work very well. Same thing with the ocean. The cold regions are connected to the warm regions. The east side of the ocean is connected to the west side of the ocean. The bays like San Francisco Bay are connected to the big ocean, the California current. It connects it all and carries lots and lots of material with it when it does so.
Yeah, we actually have an image of a map of how the ocean circulation, ocean currents are. So I'm going to go ahead and share that now. So you were talking about how oceans connect the cold parts to the warm parts. It looks like
Right.
The ocean is really well connected, really moves water around quite long distances.
Yeah, when you look at a map like this, find yourself there in North America on the left side, right, the west coast. And you see a big sort of circular motion. We call those the ocean gyres. it's in the northern hemisphere, they're going around in a clockwise sense. So some of you probably know that along the west coast of the United States is the California current flowing south. But on the other side of Japan and East Asia, there's a Kuroshio current going north. And these images, this maybe a little bit, looks a little more static and a little bit less fluctuating than water is. And you know water, I mean, if you're in your bathtub or doing washing up or anything, water keeps moving, it doesn't stay in one place. So this are these patterns in the ocean. And in south of the equator, in the South Pacific, the water goes anti-clockwise, so it comes up the coast of Chile and Peru and across the equator and down past Australia. So those are just some of the biggest patterns. There are so many of them, and this is a cool image from back in the day. We now know more and more and more of the little currents, relatively speaking, and all the swirls and whirls of the ocean.
And so obviously this is a really big picture of ocean motion, and we can't see that visibly. One of the things that people do see a lot is waves. So tell us a little bit about how waves propagate. These aren't currents, this is something different.
Yeah, these are pretty cool. Again, it's physics because it's the water is moving. And the basic physics here, some of you probably already have learned about Newton and force equals mass times acceleration. If you push water, it accelerates and moves. And if it slows down, there must be some force slowing it down. What happens here with a wave is that it's what we call an oscillatory motion, so a backwards and forwards motion. And it's just like the sound has the same thing, it's an oscillatory motion. Why is that important? Is because energy propagates in. So the storms in Alaska brought to your shorelines in California by these waves. The wind is the force that pushes on the water up in the Gulf of Alaska and creates these big waves, but they don't just stay there, they move and propagate to our shores where they slow down actually as they come into the shallows and break into this white water. So the energy is supplied in Alaska and then released here, which is pretty cool.
So in San Francisco Bay, we don't see waves so much. We see more tidal currents. So talk about, this is not San Francisco. Tell us where we are and what's going on here.
Right. So this is a pretty nice video clip of water flowing into the Russian River estuary mouth. And so you can see pretty nicely here with those foam lines, those bits of white, and even you can see kayakers on the water, and they're not paddling very hard, they're being moved by the currents. And so the tide, a lot of people are familiar with the rise and fall of the tide, that you might go to the Embarcadero one day and the water level is high and another day it's low. Well, it's not day to day, it's really from hour to hour. It's about 12 hours. The strongest tide is what we call semi-diurnal, 2 high tides a day and 2 low tides a day. But there's a whole mix of them, and they're like a pendulum. They're deterministic, as we say. They just carry on doing the same thing all the time. But the tides are like multiple pendulums because of all the celestial bodies, the moon, the sun. And it pulls on the water around the earth and deforms it and gives you these rise and fall of water in Russian River estuary or in San Francisco Bay. But just think about it. If the bay is filling up by a few feet of water in a few hours, where does it come from? It's not coming down the river fast enough, so it's coming in and out of the mouth. As the bay fills up, it comes in, and as the bay empties, it goes out.
So it's almost like taking a breath. And
exactly, yeah. So that's a very nice analogy, actually. That if you breathe in, you're sucking. It's a pressure gradient. It's the physics of it. You're sucking air into your lungs, and when you breathe out, you're pushing it out. And it's the exact same thing where you have this narrow throat, which is the mouth there of the estuary or the Golden Gate Bridge. You're going over the throat of San Francisco Bay, if you like. Actually, that's a nice image there from Google Earth. It's maybe not immediately easy to see, but you can see different colors in the water, some sort of darker blues and some lighter blue, lighter browny greeny blues, which are suspended sediment, sand, and turbidity. And if you see Golden Gate Bridge, you can see these plumes of turbid water streaming into the bay. So the bay is breathing in at this time, and then 6 hours later is going to be breathing out.
And what is the impact of this ocean water coming into the bay? Does it change the ecology, or how can we understand that relationship better?
Right, it's multifaceted really, because I think, Mary, you talked earlier about plankton, for example. So as this water comes into the bay, it's not just bringing water, salty water, cold water, water high in nutrients that have upwell along the coast, but it's bringing lots of plankton from the open coast. The plankton might be phytoplankton, little plants, but it can also be what we call meroplankton, which is really larvae and young life stages of different animals. And then as it goes out, it does the same thing. So for example, the crab that live in San Francisco Bay, their babies, if you like, their larvae, go out with this breath into the ocean, go sort of drift around for a month or two and then come back in again. Quite phenomenal. But anything in the bays move, pollutants, all the rest.
So we're talking about currents, and we were talking about waves, and now we're talking about tides, which are very predictable. We have tide charts that tell us when it's going to be high tide and low tide. But there's another phenomena of ocean motion that you study, and that's surface currents. And we have an animation of surface currents in San Francisco Bay. Can you tell us a little bit about why these are important? What is interesting about surface currents as opposed to these other ways that water moves around?
Yeah, so here again, we can see the Golden Gate Bridge on the left there, and Bay Bridge sort of center, and the arrows which are moving around. This is a great image. It shows the complexity of flow. You know, it's not just straight line in, straight line out. It gains swirls and whirls. Some of this is the tide coming and going, but then some of it is because islands get in the way. And then the third issue is that winds are very important. So you can imagine if you stand in a strong wind, it can almost blow you over. Well, it pushes the water around as well. And you'll find that when you have the sea breeze, strong afternoon wind blowing into Central Bay in the afternoons, it pushes the water into the bay or the surface of the water. And so this image here is from, we use a high frequency radar to track the surface currents in the bay, and we can see these wind patterns and the tide patterns, and then how they go around the islands to create this quite complex pattern.
Yeah.
So we have a radar antenna on at the Exploratorium. Excellent. There you can see that pole or antenna and Bay Bridge in the background. Foreground is solar panels. And then we have another one on Angel Island, another one at the Presidio at Crissy Field, etc. And these are pretty cool devices that have been in operation now, not at this site, but in general for about 30 years. Mary, I think this has been in place for several years.
Yes. Yep.
Every hour it's measuring, or even more frequently, but roughly every hour we get a map of the currents in the bay. And why do we have multiple sites? Because each of them, a little bit of physics here again, uses a Doppler shift approach to understand the currents towards and away from that point. So you're getting sort of radial currents towards where you are. If you want a vector, a vector's made of two components, then you need these radial currents at two different places to create the map you're seeing there.
Yeah, so the radar doesn't work exactly like a radar gun that a policeman would use to determine how fast something is going, because it's just more complicated to sort of figure out how water moves, because it's all
right
around. It's not just something moving against a static background. So it's complicated.
But it's similar, the Doppler shift idea is that when an object moves towards you and you bounce some sound or some signal off it, the frequency increases. And the classic thing was when there were more trains going past, you'd hear it and make a high frequency sound as it comes towards you and a low frequency sound as it goes away. And then, so the object moving away from you, when the sound bounces off it, it comes back with a lower frequency. So you know how fast it's going, which is what the radar gun does as well.
So this data is very useful. I know that for search and rescue operations or oil spills, it's used to sort of track where the currents are going, so you know where to either search or clean up. But you don't let that data, if it's not being used for search and rescue, go to waste. What is important to you about studying surface currents?
Right. No, totally. Yeah, it's invaluable when we do have something like Costco Sun or an oil spill in the bay or Deep Horizon or something. But you don't just want to react, you also want to have some idea, some expectation of where it's going to go. So we use it to understand these patterns and where's it most likely if you had an oil spill. But way beyond that is this whole ecosystem we talked about of the plankton must come to and from the bay. Or right now the ocean is acidifying, the pH is getting lower, and in upwelling systems, it's a very strong phenomena. So we're trying to understand these waters coming in from the ocean, are they impacting the bay, for example? So the waters carry the chemistry, and every tide is slightly different every time it comes in. So understanding the plankton, the chemistry, the warm waters, if you recall 2014 and 15 years, the ocean is very warm, and we use that to look at the movement of warm water into the bay. Mm-hmm. So there are many things.
Yeah. So, John, as you reflect on World Oceans Day, what do you think about in terms of what's happening with the ocean, or the importance of the ocean, or just your life's work? What is important that you want to share with folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's so many challenges and interesting, fascinating things about the ocean. And I find so many of my friends tend to go one way or the other way. A few of them think everything's fine. A lot of them think everything's dying. And of course, the truth is it's in between. The oceans are alive, they bounteous, they healthy, but they are impacted by us humans. And I think if there were a guiding principle to what I do, is how do we as humans sustainably inhabit this earth? And where we are harming the ocean, sometimes intentionally and sometimes unintentionally, what new knowledge can I generate as a research oceanographer to mitigate those impacts and to steer us in a direction where we all have food and well-being, but the ocean can continue. There's this little fact: how much of the oxygen you breathe comes from the ocean, do you think?
I know the answer to that.
Well, it's a majority. The precise number, maybe at 2/3 or maybe 3/4 of the oxygen I'm breathing now is coming from generated by the ocean. So it just gives you a sense of how important it is, way beyond any single issue.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for spending a little time with us today, John. Appreciate your time, and we'll maybe talk to you soon.
We'll talk to you soon and see you at the Exploratorium one of these days.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
We'll be right back with more World Oceans Day. Welcome back to our celebration of World Oceans Day, when we reflect on everything the ocean provides, including some pretty wonderful creatures. I have another special treat for you. We're going to hear all about the amazing return of harbor porpoises to San Francisco Bay. I'd like to welcome Lisa Strong, a multi-talented filmmaker, composer, writer, and singer, to tell us about what we're going to see. Thank you for being here with us, Lisa.
Hi, Mary. Thanks for inviting me.
Lisa, tell us about this video you made about harbor porpoises. How did you get involved telling their story?
Well, so first I have to say, this is an 8-year-old video. And so some of the information at the end is no longer current. So Mary you're going to give us the right connection, I'm hoping. So anyway, so I'm very good friends with Beth Pratt, who is the California director of the National Wildlife Federation. And she was the one who brought it to my attention. And she had this crazy idea that she wanted to do something really fun. And she got a harbor porpoise mascot costume. And she wanted me to follow her around in San Francisco and film her in her costume, and that we would maybe interact with people. And we had a little dance, the Harbor Porpoise dance, which some of the people did that for us. And I thought, oh, this is like an opportunity to write a song. So I wrote a song called Look Who's Back in Town. And so I had some help with some of the production with a rapper from San Francisco named A1. And we used that as the basis of our music video that I was editor and put it all together. And we used that, Beth used that for her project.
That sounds really fun. So let's roll that video now.
Look who's back around. Harbor Porpoise back in town.
Harbor Porpoise back in town.
Hey there, where you been?
Hey there, where you been?
Good to see you back again. Back in the bay, by the city, the San Francisco Bay. Once was lost is found. Harbor Porpoise back in town.
Harbor Porpoise back in town.
From the Golden Gate look down.
Golden Gate look down.
The swimmer splashing, playing around. Back in the bay, by the city, the San Francisco Bay.
Why'd you leave anyway? Not enough sardines? Did you forget about the bay? Is that why you stayed away? Maybe now, more cleaned up. The bay's just more inviting. 65 years have gone. Things more to your liking. What?
Look who's back around. Harbor Porpoise back in town.
Harbor Porpoise back in town.
Hey there, where you been?
Hey there, where you been?
Good to see you back again. Back in the bay, by the city, the San Francisco Bay. Back in the bay, by the city, the San Francisco Bay.
Hi, I'm Bill Keener with Golden Gate Cetacean Research.
And I'm Beth Pratt, the California Director of the National Wildlife Federation. And I've been running around San Francisco and Berkeley and Oakland in a porpoise suit to help bring attention and to tell you about this remarkable story of the harbor porpoise returning to San Francisco Bay after 65 years. Bill and his team are doing amazing work on it.
Right, Beth. What we're finding is that there's many porpoises using San Francisco Bay, and they're all over from the east side and the north to the Bay Bridge. So if you're out looking for porpoises or just walking along the shore from a bridge and you see something, you can actually report it to us. And that's part of our scientific research, is to track these porpoises' movements in the bay.
So we hope you'll help. Again, the National Wildlife Federation and Golden Gate Cetacean Research have teamed up to find out, A, why the porpoise has returned, and to make sure he stays. So go to www.sfbayporpoises.org, report sightings, and help donate to our important cause. Thank you so much, and the porpoises thank you too.
Welcome back to our virtual celebration of World Ocean Day. I'm very happy to have with us Sebastian DeHallo. He's the Chief Operating Officer of an ocean technology company called Saildrone. Sebastian, tell us, what is Saildrone?
Thank you, Mary. So Saildrone is an ocean robotics company. We use robots to study the oceans all around the world that cover 70% of the planet. And a Saildrone, if you've never seen one, is a new type of robot. It actually has no engine. It's powered by the wind using a patented sail system. That means that it can travel thousands of miles without using fuel or making any emissions or noise. And it is powered by the sun to create electricity to power a suite of sensors that measure the ocean. So let me tell you a little bit more. This is a diagram of the Saildrone, and you can see below the surface the keel and the rudder. So it's a little bit like a sailboat that you might be used to, except there's no one on board. But really, if you zoom a little bit more on the wing, you will see that it carries specific sensors. This is actually a robot that's bigger than you think. It's about 23 feet long, it's 15 feet tall, and about 6 feet deep. So it's a big machine if you see them in San Francisco Bay. So let's zoom in on the wing. There we measure the state of the atmosphere, starting with the wind. We also look at the amount of solar radiation. We look at the skin temperature of the ocean, and we have cameras that can take photographs of what's happening around the drone. If you look below the water, we have another suite of sensors that measures the temperature of the water, its salinity, the amount of oxygen and carbon dioxide. We also use echo sounders, which are acoustic sensors that send sound waves down and can measure fish and krill and map the seabed floor and map water currents. So all in all, a powerhouse of sensors. And all this data is sent in real time via satellite to a command center and to even the scientist's mobile phone. So the data can be looked at even if the scientist is on the ship.
So tell me a little bit more, Sebastian. How is Saildrone know what to do? How is this controlled? Do you use an iPhone to control Saildrone?
Yes, actually, a Saildrone can be controlled from an iPhone. We send them waypoints, which are sort of point along the way, and the Saildrone knows on itself how to go from A to B, taking into account wind, current, and wave. And
so Saildrone actually has no limit to where it can go as long as it's the ocean. Tell us about the different places that Saildrone has gone.
Yeah, so let's remember that the ocean is a very vast domain. It's 360 million square miles. It's 70% of the planet. And over the past 10 years, Saildrones have really sailed on every major ocean, from the Arctic to the Antarctic, to the tropical Pacific, the Gulf of Mexico, the Atlantic Ocean, the big North Sea, the Mediterranean, the Southern Ocean. So really, those Saildrones have traveled all around the world.
And Saildrones, they don't have to be quarantined. Right now, I know that a lot of ocean scientists that use ships, they're not going out right now, but Saildrone actually is out doing science as we speak.
Yes, Saildrones are right now leaving during this COVID crisis. They are currently measuring things in the Arctic. They're currently measuring things in the Pacific and the Atlantic. Hold on one second. Sorry, this is my little co-pilot here.
That's okay.
might have to interrupt it slightly. So the Saildrones during this COVID crisis are very busy because many ships have to stay in port due to the virus. Saildrones are being sent and are currently counting pollock in the Bering Sea. They are tracking a phenomenon in the Atlantic. They're measuring carbon in the Med. So robots can be very helpful in a time of pandemic like the one we're living now.
So you were just mentioning the Arctic. I know that Saildrone has done a lot of work, and you're going to tell us a little bit about one of the missions now.
Yes, the Arctic is a fascinating place. It's very remote and very hard to study. So let's take a look at what the Arctic looks like. To go there, you need an ice-rated ship because you have those big ice sheets that create floats, which can be very dangerous if you are on a ship. So you need those big icebreaker. So the Saildrones, little robots, sail there and avoid the ice and are doing work that can otherwise requires very, very expensive means indeed. So the Arctic is also fascinating because it's the home of the walleye pollock, which is a white fish that most of us know and we eat because if you ever eaten fish stick, that's pollock. It's the largest commercial fishery in the United States. And so the Saildrones zigzag the entire Bering Sea, counting pollock using acoustic echo sounders. This is a track of what the Saildrones do. So they leave from Dutch Harbor, which is famous because of the show Deadliest Catch. And then they zigzag across the Bering Sea and they sail through the Bering Strait and they zigzag up in the far Arctic up north, all the way up to the ice sheet.
How long does it take Saildrone to do a mission like this? It looks like a lot of miles on the ocean.
That's right. We start as soon as the ice melts in the spring, and then we come back as soon as the ice comes back in the fall. So we only can do this work in the summer, really, which is about 100 days of operation per year. And so the Bering Sea is also very interesting because it's the home of the fur seal colony on the Pribilof Islands, small islands in the middle of the Bering Sea. And scientists have been faced with a mystery. This colony has been decreasing in size every year. So to try to understand the mystery, scientists are gluing a GPS tracker on the fur of the seals. Doesn't hurt the animals, it's just glued to the fur. And that enables the scientists to follow the mother seals and try to understand what they are doing. Of course, they spend most of their time hunting for pollock. This is a seal with a camera on its head, and you can see it's about to catch, a fish. And so the sail drones have been following the seals, trying to understand what is really happening and how could that be affecting the size of the colony. So this is really hard work because, as I mentioned, there's ice, and you can see from those photos taken from the onboard cameras from the sail drone that it looks like another planet, and it's really hard to navigate all between those ice flows as we try to follow the fish and the seals. Really hard work, even for a robot. And sometimes the seals themselves interfere. This is not the first seal; it's a harbor seal that jumped on the sail drone. It's just taking a nap up there in the deep Arctic. Maybe it's avoiding an orca that's hunting the seal.
How long did that seal stay on there? Did he hitch a ride for a while, or was it just like an afternoon?
I think it stayed there for a good old day, just taking a long nap. And we were a little bit worried about our senses, but it just took a nap and then just went back into the Arctic Ocean. So the scientists, when they get the GPS data from the tracks on the seal, they see this pattern in the middle of the island. And then each line is an individual seal that swims and then dives, for fish. It's really quite beautiful. And as you get closer, you can see the individual seal track, and you can see the dive up and down as the mother seals go and hunt for fish. This is very hard work. It requires a lot of energy from the seal. So as the sail drone follows the seal, we use our echo sounder. On the left, you can see the seal swimming from the island and diving to about 20 meters. And the sail drone can detect that it's only hunting for small pollock, which are very low calories, like just snacks. And the seals have to swim much further distance to then start diving deeper to what the sail drone sees as larger pollock, big fish, which are high calories. But by that time, the seal has expended so much energy that it comes back to the island really, really tired and with not enough calories to really feed the pups. And it's this lack of energy from the mother seals, because they have to swim so far out, that's really responsible for the collapse of the colony. So the next question is, why do they have to swim so far to get the big pollock? Again, the sail drone provides another clue. If we move to the next slide, you can see that the water temperature, which is color-coded here, is very warm in red here, where the seal hunts. And pollock don't like warm waters. As the waters are warming, the pollock swims further and further north away from the island in search of cooler waters. So really now we start to understand that the water temperature is driving the fish further from the island. And because the mother seals have to swim further, they have less energy to lactate their pups. So that's a little bit of the mystery of the fur seals in Simple Islands.
So I just want to understand, so the pollock, this fish, which normally lives in cold waters, actually moving farther away from where the seals are hunting. And that is making the whole ecosystem change, right? Because if they're used to being able to go someplace close by, now they have to go far away.
That's right. And you should know that the sail drone have observed warming in the Arctic higher than any other place on Earth. It's one of the places when we talk about climate change that is really experiencing this warming water to an unprecedented degree. And as the water warms, the fish move further north, but of course the island does not move. And so that's what's creating a problem for the sea.
So now we're going to go to the opposite end and talk about some of the exploits of sail drone in the Antarctic.
That's right. And the Antarctic is fascinating. It's also a very remote place, very hard to access. But unlike the Arctic, where the ice is floating really on an ocean, the Antarctic is ice resting on land. It's a big island, if you want, with ice on land. And so the goal of the sail drone has been to sail around Antarctica. This is really hard work for robots, but we were the first ever robots to go around Antarctica unassisted. We left from New Zealand and we sailed all around Antarctica in 198 days. This is a really big feat for small robots like this. So why were we doing this? Well, one of the things we were studying was krill. Krill is this small animal. And you might wonder, why is it so important to look at krill? Well, krill is the basis of the food chain in Antarctic. So while we were counting krill, we were also looking at their predators, like penguins. And again, just like the seals, scientists are studying penguins by gluing GPS receivers on their back and then trying to follow where they're going. And of course, the penguins go where there is krill. So you can see this is a similar type of interaction. But beyond penguins, krill also serve as food for larger animals like whales. So by studying krills, you can also understand, how this is impacting whales who might become, thinner or fatter based on the amount of nutrients that you find in the water. So this is called the food web. At the base of it is plankton, which transforms CO2 and solar energy into life, and then feeds krill, which is then the basis of the food web from penguins, elephant seals, and large whales. So that's why we study this. And us humans, we are also part of a much larger food web because our survival depends on the global food web.
Mm-hmm.
So the way we study krill with a robot, again, is using ecosounder. This device at the keel of the sail drone that sends sound wave down, and the backscatter on the back of the krill gives us an idea about how much food there is in the water column. So we can look at fish and we can look at krill. This is how a robot is studying what's below the water.
Mm-hmm. And is this kind of study that sail drone is doing, measuring the amount of ocean life there is, that's not really possible with traditional ships in the same way as sail drone did. Is that right?
Well, that's correct. I mean, when you first, it's very hard to go around Antarctica in a ship in the first place, but even then, a ship can scare the fish. And so when we compared the measurement from a sail drone and the measurement from a ship using the same ecosounder, the sail drone sees sometimes 25% more life, because the fish, of course, get scared by the big engine from the ship and they dive down, and so the sail drone does not disturb life, doesn't make any noise. And so we can really catch nature in its undisturbed state.
So sail drone is really providing data for scientists they didn't have before. And is it surprising them? I think there's another story about another system, the carbon system. So tell us about that.
That's right. That's another mystery or riddle. We all know about CO2 or carbon dioxide. We emit it in our factories, in our cars. And when we cut trees, that also, reduces the amount of carbon that's captured by forests, like the Amazon forest. So all the CO2 is ending up in the atmosphere, and that's measured very precisely. And we all know that it's going up and up and up, and therefore the planet is getting warmer. What we do not know is that a large portion of this CO2 is actually absorbed by the ocean. Scientists believe about 30% of the global carbon that we produce is absorbed by the ocean. And the question is where and how? And so one of the big hypotheses is that the Southern Ocean, with all these big waves, is actually trapping this CO2. So we send the sail drones with very precise device that can measure the amount of CO2 in the air and in the water. Again, this is a very hard job. Look at this picture. It's taken by the cameras on board the sail drone in a typical day in the Southern Ocean. It has gigantic waves. Some are 60 foot tall. This would break even the biggest ship. And those little sail drones navigate all those big waves and measure carbon 24/7 without interruption. And what they bring back to scientists is along the track, you can see in yellow here, is the measurement of carbon. So the green line in the middle there is the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, which is about 400 parts per million. And then the wiggly line that goes up and down is the amount of CO2 in the ocean. And when there is less CO2 in the ocean than in the air, then the ocean is absorbing the CO2 from the air. We call this a carbon sink. It's good. It regulates the climate. It slows down global warming. That's the green area on the graph here. But what surprised scientists very much is that the sail drone brought back some data showing that in some parts of the Southern Ocean, there is more CO2 in the ocean than in the atmosphere. And so it gets released by the ocean. We call this the ocean acting as a carbon source. It's adding CO2 into the atmosphere, which is why it's red on the graph. More or less from around South Africa to Australia, which is the Indian Ocean sector of the Southern Ocean. And so that was a big surprise. And it contradicted what scientists thought was happening in the Southern Ocean. So this is how a robot can bring new data and try to tell scientists about things that they did not know existed.
So I'm just interested because this is a timeline, is that right? Or is the line?
That is correct, yes.
It's a timeline. So during the summer, when there's a lot of maybe plankton activity, the ocean absorbs carbon. But as we move farther in the season, it's releasing carbon. Is that because of the seasons? Or why do scientists, this is a mystery, why do scientists think this is happening now that they have this new data?
You're absolutely correct. You know, the carbon absorption mechanism at the ocean is, life plays a big role. You know, phytoplankton that takes CO2 from the air and solar energy and creates life could be one of the reasons. But in reality, we don't know. And we can just observe those things. And so sail drones are going to go back to the Southern Ocean to try to dig deeper into this mystery. And right now we can only work with hypotheses. So, you know, sail drones, when they sail around, they take pictures, they take measurement. It takes a scientist, it takes a human to see what they're seeing and try to understand what's going on. Look at this photo here. This is a photo of the blue ocean, but can you see the big whale under the sail drone? So that's a great illustration for like all the mystery that the ocean, you know, hides under its surface that we really have not explored. Up to 80% of all the ocean has never been explored, and it still remains to be discovered. So, you know, it's a really fascinating place to study.
And sail drone is out there. More sail drones are going out doing missions, helping scientists uncover mysteries about the ocean, things they didn't know before. I really appreciate you coming to share this with us today, Sebastian. And I wonder if you could just leave us with a little thought. We're celebrating the World Oceans Day. What are you passionate about in the ocean? What do you want people to know about your line of work?
So the oceans is just an amazing thing to be celebrated because we are all connected to it. And sometimes it's easy to think that the ocean is only for people who live next to it. But I just want to leave you with a thought that even if you live, you know, very far away from the oceans come to you. Next time it rains or it snows, think about this. This is the ocean, the water from the ocean that has evaporated and has traveled thousands of miles to come to you. So the ocean is really the basis of all of our life on Earth, and it is full of mystery. So I hope that for, you know, World Ocean Day, you might, you know, consider how you might become part of unraveling those mysteries, maybe becoming a scientist or an oceanographer. And there's a lot of exciting things to do with robots and new technologies to study the oceans.
Well, thank you again so much, Sebastian, and we'll be right back.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you for joining the Exploratorium's virtual celebration of World Oceans Day. We've covered a lot of cool science, from ocean-going robots to the ways that ocean motion keeps our planet in balance, and even that tiny ocean plankton provide more than half the oxygen in our atmosphere. I'm sorry we couldn't see you in the museum and answer your questions in person, but we look forward to welcoming everyone back as soon as possible. We'd love to hear your stories about the ocean. Please share your photos of your favorite shoreline on social media using our hashtag #ShareYourShore and tag us at Exploratorium. There's lots more ocean stories and activities on the Exploratorium website, and be sure to tune in tonight right here at 7 p.m. Pacific time for more ocean programs, featuring 2 films and a soundscape that take an artist's eye to observing the ocean and bay. Stay safe, go outside and enjoy some fresh air, and thank the ocean for every second breath you take.